Hello and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the concept of spacing mostly, with some wiggling and trading involved, because that is going to be part of our spacing ideas. So spacing is a sort of a back and forth. Forward punishes mistakes, backwards invites interest, and a neutral stance forces the enemy to think. So there are a few things we can kind of demonstrate here in isolation, where, for example, if we look at the range of our champion, right, and this doesn't really matter if it's an auto attack, it can be an auto attack, a ranged one, a melee one, it can be a spell, whatever. Everything in this game is going to require spacing, as everything has a certain range except global abilities, in which case there isn't really spacing involved in the actual ability itself, I suppose. But okay, we're going to be thinking about it this way, right? So if we are this close to the enemy champion, right, and we actually are standing still, then the enemy simply has to react to our still motion, right? So in this case, we move forward or we move backwards, right? If we move backwards, our champion is going to turn. And if we move forwards, our champion will just move, right? As you can see. So in this case, the enemy just has to like sort of read the movement of the champion, whether I'm turning or I'm not turning, right? That's why a lot of people will do something that's called wiggling, right? So when you're actually wiggling and clicking like forward and backwards, right? See how sometimes I'm entering the range of the champion and sometimes I'm not, right? And if I do it a bit further away, then I'm never entering the range of the champion. But say that the enemy is also wiggling, right? In that case, if I actually initiate a forward wiggle, so I end up at, say, like this kind of a range, right? I can already out-attack from this, but let's say like here. It's allowed to, say like here. There we go, see? So there I had to like move a little bit, like a little step, right? But then if the enemy is also wiggling, then that's going to mean for us that as the enemy actually moves forward, I am able to get an auto attack off and I'm able to move backwards instantly, right? In that case, he failed on his own spacing. That's why this is going to be one of the big variables for us, where the further I am from the enemy champion, right, the more time they have to react. In this case, if I'm standing still and the enemy champion is also standing still, and we are this far away, then that means that this distance needs to be traversed before either one of us can interact with the enemy champion. That means that this distance is the reaction time that we actually have as a buffer, right? So in this case, it would look like this. See? Very easy to react to this, right? Then in another scenario, right? Let's say that we do let's say a long wiggle, right? There are short wiggles and long wiggles, and they have different purposes. So a longer wiggle would be like, say that you are permanently moving something like this in the laning phase, right? Now, is that because you are unable to wiggle faster, or is that because there's an actual intention there? Depends, right? But there can be an intention, and there is an actual practical use for this. So if you're moving like this, then you are permanently occupying this kind of a space, right? And you might think that it might be more advantageous. Say that we are trying to wiggle towards this rock, right? And let's say towards the end of the stone, right? So something like this, right? So you might think that if I just want to be as close to the enemy champion and have the best odds of getting an auto attack off, right? It might be the best for me to just wiggle here, right? And just do it on this little triangle. And that can be a case, right? That can be the case. But there's a small issue there, right? When I do that, I'm not actually getting like that much more space. That's kind of like accepted space, right? It's kind of just like, okay, well, he knows that I'm going to be on this triangle. So effectively, I'm not really doing much more than if I was standing still here, right? The only thing I'm really doing is masking the direction that I'm walking in, which is also a good part of wiggling, right? You're trying to mask the direction you're walking in, which means that they have to have sort of like a, let's say, a quantum puzzle, right? Where you're both simultaneously moving towards them and away from them. So they kind of have to take a guess, right? And whatever. So the enemy can't really be too sure, right? You can also add the S key to this, which is the stop command, right? And you can like make your movement even more complex. And it's much harder to read then, right? But that's not the important thing here. The important thing here is that in this case, you're only masking the movement, which means that if the enemy is actually trying to mirror your actual range, right? Let's say that you have the same range and they're trying to mirror it, right? Then when you actually are masking your movement like this, they should probably be masking their movement as well, right? And then it's kind of like a mind game. Like, oh, I decide to like walk forward now and I try to go for an auto, right? And if they actually miss the beat on that, then they won't really react in time and you will get a free auto, whatever. right? Or you might just get an auto attack and they don't want to trade auto for auto or something, because maybe your auto attacks do more damage or something. But the purpose of these long strafes, kind of, right, or long wiggles, is that you're kind of occupying a bigger space, right? That's like accepted. So when you're actually like walking forward like this, the enemy is going to accept that, oh, well, after he walks this far forward, right, he's most likely going to walk backwards, right? But then sometimes you can walk like more forward and more backwards, right? This also makes it more annoying for them, and they need to like kind of track you even more, right? In terms of where they actually want to be. And it's very difficult for them to interact with you when you're actually quite far away from them, right? Because they are going to be too far away, right? So if they're actually trying to mask your, or rather match your movement in some capacity, then when they actually say match it towards this middle line, right? Because this is sort of like the middle that you would want to kind of like match towards, and then just like move backwards when this happens, right? If you don't actually want to chase all the way to like this range, like let's say here, right? Then you will sometimes get away with, say, moving forward, right? They move backwards, and if they actually get into this flow of like moving forward and backwards, then you can like move a bit more forward and like throw them off, right? Obviously, this is like a bit of an exaggerated example, right? But say something like this would be a more realistic distance of a longer movement, right? And that can have its own use, sort of. All right. So if we actually talk a bit more about the theory, right? The baseline idea that we have here is that when playing League, we want to have as much of an impact as possible. Therefore, testing the enemy skill range and adapting to that is going to be very beneficial to us. We want to find what kind of a position we can hope for, where we can play for advantage. That's going to be our preferred way of playing generally. And that's many people's preferred way of playing, as they want to have as much of an impact and this 1v9 mentality that most people have in League, right? Then many players will end up, though, skipping at least one of the steps of actually proper wiggling, spacing, trading, whatever, right? And we can abuse that for some kind of an advantage for us, right? And what many people as well do is they will only play for advantage, even if the enemy player is not actually like worse than them, right? In which case, they're kind of disrespecting the enemy, and all you have to do is stand your ground and be good in terms of your fundamental skill here, right? So the theory behind this is that during laning, we will utilize wiggles as they throw off the enemy's ability to read our movement. That will make both skill shots and prediction harder. Prediction as in like predicting if we're going forward or backwards. This would then mean that the enemy can't be sure if you're going to go forward or backwards as the two options, or if alternatively you might just stay in the same place, right? You're permanently moving, so there's a space where there's a margin of error before the enemy can be sure that you're actually doing something. Because in that margin of error, it's kind of like, well, maybe he just didn't do his wiggle properly, right? Or something. Or maybe he just clicked like a bit further than he wanted to, or a bit later, right? So you kind of just get a bit more, let's say, error inside of the enemy's mind where it's still like, oh, well, he's not really going for anything, right? Before you actually read it properly. Obviously, there are players that are going to read it better, and there are players that are going to read it worse, right? But we're trying to make it as difficult for them as possible. Alright. So then, this will also, in turn, require a much higher degree of focus from the enemy. Because if we're actually trying to track the other person, right? If I'm standing still, it's very easy for you to track me. And then, as I move forward, it's very easy for you to understand, well, he's moving forward, right? Is he going to move far forward or not? I don't know. But I know he's moving forward, right? But if I'm doing this, you don't really know, right? And then, oh, suddenly I'm moving forward. You see how this is a lot more difficult, right? Because the whole time you had to look at my champion and figure out, okay, this is a forward timing, right? See? And this is kind of like, it gave me an extra momentum because I went forward as my champion was turning forward, right? And I kind of get like further ahead while kind of making it look similar in terms of like how hard it is to, let's say, read, right? Like reading it is going to be like you reading that I move to here is going to be as difficult as you reading that I move to here when I actually do the wiggle a bit better, right? That's kind of the point here. So then we will make it so that the enemy needs to approach the neutral stance within the game, neutral stance being when we're actually not moving forward or backwards, in a more, let's say, in a different way, right? If we assume that going towards the enemy champion is our attack move and running away from the enemy champion is our defensive move, and wiggle is our neutral move, then to achieve advantage, we will want to get a CS advantage, an XP advantage, or a kill advantage. This means that we believe we are the stronger champion in the current position, or alternatively just believe we are much better as a player. We want to start interaction between the champions, which results in enemy losing resource, whether that be CS, experience, HP, or mana. Any of those resources can be pretty decent to attack, right? Depending on whatever champion we might we might be playing against. So then, in that case, if we are the worst player, then it's going to be good for us to stay at this range, right? Because if we're staying somewhere here, that's very easy for us to actually read if the enemy is coming onto us. And if the enemy actually handshakes this and they don't move forward, then okay, great. We kind of got away with it. We can probably get our minions anyway. And we're chilling, right? And that's very good for us as the worst player that's worse at spacing, worse at laning, worse at trading, whatever, right? But if we believe we are better, and that is what we usually should be striving to be in solo queue, right? It's going to be ideal for us to be somewhere near this range. Now, this range is going to depend both on your own ability, so your own polishing of your skills, your own, let's say, natural abilities, so how fast your reaction time is, for example, right? How good your hand-eye coordination is, whatever. And on top of that, how good your setup is. And that's why the first video here was on setup. Because if you are playing on a 60 Hz monitor, that means that you have a delay of, say, I believe that what they say is like 9 milliseconds input delay or whatever. Or delay before it shows up on your screen or whatever. They just take the actual delay of the refresh rate and they half it, right? And then if you're playing on, say, 240, that would mean that you are instead, I believe, within like 4 milliseconds or something, right? So that's like a few milliseconds that you're gaining, but those milliseconds can be huge. At the same time, if you're, say, using a mouse from IKEA, I don't know if they even sell mice, but I mean, they're pretty known, so maybe they do, I don't know. If you're using a mouse, say, from IKEA that has like a 20 millisecond delay on its click, that's going to be a big disadvantage, right? That's obviously an exaggeration. I don't think that there's going to be any mouse that's going to have a 20 millisecond delay on its click. That would be a bit crazy. But I've seen keyboards with that delay, so I mean, it's not out of the question. Let's say a more realistic delay, right? Say something like 5 milliseconds on a pretty mediocre mouse, while say the OP18K has a sub 1 millisecond delay, right? In that case, what we see is that as you're actually like trying to do something, right, it's going to be a much wider margin of error, right? Because the timing is going to be different, and also your reaction to the enemy is actually going to be different, right? Because the closer we get to the enemy champion, the closer it gets to what people like to call pure reactivity, where you're just reacting to what the target is doing, rather than really having any kind of a systematic approach, right? Because if I'm this far away, it's pretty easy for me to just kind of, I mean, it's still reacting to what the enemy is doing, right? But it's kind of like rules I can follow here, right? But if I'm at this stage, then it's pretty much just pure reactivity, right? Okay. So then, the stronger champion will dictate the pace of combat, where minions are our first kind of variable that will offset this, right? So we have a few variables that can actually change up the dynamic here, right? We've been assuming that our range is the same as the enemy until now, but we could have more range, we could have less range, we could have a stronger auto attack, we could have minions on our side, we could have many things, right? And that will change up how we really want to space and what is going to be the correct answer in many situations. So if we say that we have minions, right? Say that our casters are somewhere here, right? That would mean that for us right now, okay, I can spawn even an ally dummy to represent the casters. It's going to be easier to visualize then. Okay, so let's say that we have this, right? If the enemy actually autos us right now, he won't really take that much damage from the casters, right? And it's still going to be all right. If we're actually moving forward, then we're kind of like in an attacking stance, right? And we're saying, okay, well, I want to trade, right? And the enemy can handshake this, or the enemy can reject this, right? But if we go auto for auto here, if their minions are here, we might take some damage, but okay, whatever, right? Generally, it's going to be more of an auto attack for auto attack type of thing in this situation, right? And if our auto attacks are actually stronger than theirs, and say an auto attack plus skill combo, right? Which is generally the way you trade on, say, ADCs, right? Or mages or whatever, So say that you want to just use auto attack plus W on Ash, right? Or you want to use auto attack plus Q on Kai'Sa or something, right? You're going to then trade like this, especially when the enemy's spell is down. But then if we are the weaker champion, say we're playing against something like Draven, right? And let's say that we don't have an actual range advantage. So say we're playing like Kai'Sa or something, right? We are going to want our minions to actually be helping us. In some cases, specifically with something like Draven, he might even beat us in our minions, right? But generally, minions are going to be a very big cushion for the damage difference between us and the enemy champion. So in this case, we would be standing here, right? Or something, or wiggling towards this place. And us being here, right, now means that if the enemy is actually moving into us, right? So say that the enemy moves from here to say like here, right? Or something, or even here. And then they engage a trade with us, they will take probably more than one auto attack from the minions, right? And they will probably aggro more minions, which is going to in turn mean that they're going to take more damage from the minions. And this damage can make up for the difference in our auto attacks, and we can get a favorable trade then. Especially if we're running down here like this, right? The biggest mistake you can make in this situation, in most cases, is running somewhere like this, because then you're running away from the minions, and them actually running like this is going to allow them to avoid a lot of the minion damage. But if you run towards your minions, or below them or whatever, then putting the minions in between yourselves is going to make them take the most amount of damage from minions, right? And that's going to be very helpful for you. Then, okay. With this, we need to then realize our own ideal space to occupy. If the enemy oversteps, you punish, in which case even an even trade is good. If not, you do not, unless you're stronger, right? So if you're stronger, then always trading, as long as you're not trading into the enemy wave or something, can be decent, right? Especially when you have range advantage. When you have range advantage, it's really OP, right? And that's because these champions like Ashe, Caitlyn, whatever, right, can hit the enemy and get out for free. So say that you are wiggling like this, right? And the enemy has much less range. They only go up to here, right, with range. So if you're going into their, into like this, right? I mean, if only this indicator was a bit accurate, that would be really amazing as well, because it would be really a lot easier to actually show these things. But I mean, as you play this game, you'll really learn the ranges with the champions, especially if you play like your own role, right? And you will kind of know the ranges anyway. You don't need to actually see them. The purpose of the circle is just for demonstration. So then, if the enemy is wiggling here, right, then we can try to actually sneak in auto attacks. Or alternatively, if they actually fail a wiggle, right, and they don't actually read our wiggles correctly, then we can get a free out on them, right? Like say that they move a bit closer, right? We will start our auto attack and get them. In many cases, the way that people will try to combat this is by using these bushes. So what then happens is, say that you're the lower range champion, right? Say the minions are here, like somewhere here. You're going to then be moving out of the bush, autoing the minion, moving back into the bush, out, in, right? And from the enemy's POV, this would look as you just showing up here for a split second and actually just moving back in instantly. You do have to be careful not to fail it, but as long as you're like doing it like somewhat consciously, right? So you're like trying to actually make sure you leave the bush before you auto, right? They won't have the time to auto attack you, because you choose the timing, right? Because they need to bring their mouse on top of you, and they need to start the auto attack at the same time as you're starting the auto attack in general, for them to actually get it off. So it's mostly going to cancel as they break vision. So that's like a little tech that you use to offset this. Okay. Hello, hello? Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Okay. Amazing. Are you ready?
Hello. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Are you on?
On what league?
Yes. Get into league. I just want to demonstrate a few things.
Okay.
Not many.
Okay, so an hour is enough.
Yeah, it's plenty, bro. It's not even an hour, bro. It's like 10 minutes.
Okay.
So what we want to show is some ideas on spacing. So we want to like mirror spacing. We want to try like different types of wiggles and how annoying it is to read them, right?
Okay.
That kind of thing. What's your IGN, by the way?
Second striking hashtag meow.
Hashtag meow.
Yeah. Well, you have me.
Yeah, yeah. Whatever you say, kitten. There we go. Okay, just pick I don't know, Ash or Caitlyn. Up to you.
I'll pick Kate so I don't give you slow.
Okay, I pick Kate as well. Just go like PTA, I think. So we don't get movement speed.
Okay.
Okay. So what we wanna do, I think we just meet in, I don't know, river or mid lane or bot lane. I don't care. Something. And then we want to basically mirror how the other person like walks. Like one time you can mirror me and one time I can mirror you. And also, let me think. Also, we're trying like, say, different types of wiggles, I guess. And that should demonstrate it. Just by, I don't know, Doran's, I guess. Or actually, not Doran's, just by,
Bonus shield.
yeah, Doran's shield, exactly. Perfect.
Okay, where do I go? Like,
Just go
Drake?
like, yeah, just go Drake, I guess. That's alright. We can work with Drake. Are you a Drake fan?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. So basically, wait, I need to add the fucking keybind
What keybind?
to show advanced stats, like in menus, right? Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay. Yeah, but I had to add it. Okay, so the thing is, you can do it first. Basically, we just hold C and you just wiggle however you want, and you can move towards me or away from me, and I'll just try to like mirror it as closely as possible, right?
Wait, what? Okay, so you, if I go towards you, you go away from me, and if I go away from you, you
Yeah,
go
yeah.
away from me. Okay, so I'm the one who should.
In this case, you're the lead, yeah.
Okay, so I'm supposed to auto deck, like get into auto deck range.
If you want,
Okay,
yeah,
right.
you can. But this is
Okay,
going
so
to be an elevation difference at this point. But basically, in this case, right, it's very annoying to actually kind of like it should be annoying for you to actually get to me or get away from me because I'm just mirroring what you do, right? And it's a lot more strain for me than if, for example, just move away a bit. Just place a word like this so that you can see me. Well, and then like in this case, right? Now it's like much easier for me, right? Like just do the same, right? Like now it's like it takes like very little effort, right? For me, but it's like much less annoying for you to read as well, right? It's like much easier to read like what the other person is doing, right? Because you have like this buffer of reaction time because of the range that we are away from each other, right? You know what I mean?
uh,
Okay, you do it now, and I will be the lead this time, and you just try to mirror it, right? So just hold C and just try to keep me out of your range, but try to be as close as possible, right?
okay, well we reached the end.
Hmm?
We reached the end.
Yeah. But if you compare this, right? See how the closer you are, the more it's like strainful to actually to mirror it,
Yeah.
right? But it's also harder to read, and it's like more prone to making mistakes. So this is like what I wanted to showcase as first thing, because whenever you are closer to the enemy, and the closer you can actually mirror the enemy's champion, the harder it is for them to actually read, right? And in this case, it's also elevation shit, right? So it then makes you have more range or less range or whatever, and it also makes it more complex, but that doesn't really matter. The most important part here is that being so close to the enemy makes it so that you kind of have two options, right? So either one of us has two options. Either we move away and we can see that we are not comfortable playing at that range, in which case I am kind of getting an artificial space that I'm not really supposed to have, right? Because you don't need to give me the space. Say that we go like to mid lane or something, I guess, right? And say that you just want to play like with your minions or something. I don't know, but you don't really need to hit minions or anything. So in this case, right? Like say that you just move backwards because you're not really comfortable with like the like mirroring like closely, right? That means that now I'm getting like more space inside of the lane for no reason, even though I'm not supposed to have it, because you could actually be mirroring me closer, and then I have less space, and you can like punish me more, right? And it also makes it so it's harder for me to actually read what's going on in the lane. It's harder for me to deal with like skill shots and stuff, because the closer you are with a skill shot, the easier it is to hit it and the harder it is to dodge it. And on top of that, it's also a lot more attention being spent on this, and that means that there's a lot less attention on the minimap, for example, right? Or on other things. So basically, you're just overwhelming my mental capacity in this way, right? And I'm doing the same to you, right? That's kind of the idea here. And whoever can do that better can kind of like get a big advantage. That's why, say, setups in League can be pretty important, even though they are often not really talked about. And on top of that, it can be quite important to actually train like these kinds of things, right? But then, okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show is the real purpose of like a long wiggle compared to like a short wiggle, right? So generally people love these short wiggles, and they mostly just mask the direction that you're moving in, right? So then I'm also adding S here, but let's say that I'm just like wiggling, right? In this case, right, it's just like about you reading where I'm moving, right? Like if I'm moving forward or backwards, right? Would you say that?
Yeah, or did you not hear me?
Yeah, but like you're very low, that's why. So okay, so you agree. And then okay, but what if then I switch it up and I start like wiggling more like this, right? Do you see how this is like a different thing? But like, what do you think is the purpose of this one?
Mm, I'll have a low IQ answer.
Yeah, sure,
Like
bro.
get me to do less moves as well.
It can be to get you to do less moves as well, but it can also be a sort of extension of my actual space, right? Of my space, of my acceptable space, and my actual like, let's say like a hitbox, right? Or whatever. Like I think the easiest way to imagine is a hitbox, right? So when I'm doing this, right, my generic hitbox is going to be around this one little square, right? And I'm just going to be like moving in that little square and changing directions. But when I start moving like this, right, you can see how now the space I'm occupying is wider, right? But this also means you're giving me a wider margin of error. So let's say
Okay, but
now,
why would you do it like this? Why wouldn't you do it like left and right or like up and down
what do you
if we're
mean
playing
up
against?
and down?
Okay, why would you
Like
extend
this?
your yeah, but like the last ones? Like why would you extend your hitbox uh in one like this line if I'm
Well,
playing a skill
be-
shot?
because this is not really about skill shot, but rather I'm talking about spacing right now. If we were talking about skill shots purely, then yeah, generally it would be that, but there are different kinds of skill shots. For example, a Malzahar Q, I will want to extend it this way, whereas like a Nidalee Spear or something, I will want to extend it the other way. But generally what I'm talking about here is more like a spacing without attacks type of thing, where if I'm doing this now, right? Like right now, you're thinking that there's nothing off when I'm actually moving this much, right? But then if I move like a little bit more, and then I move back, right? And I vary it up, you're still going to think there's nothing off, right? But this means that I'm actually throwing off your margin of error, where you actually think that it's like normal for me to be, no? Because if I'm just doing this, right? If I start moving, you instantly think something is not normal, right? I
Yeah.
mean, obviously I can also throw in some feints here, and you can kind of achieve a similar thing, right? In terms of like, let's say that I'm doing this, and then I move forward, and then I do the wiggle again, right? And I maybe move forward, and I move backwards, right? But it's like a bit more obvious in this case what I'm trying to actually do, right? Because when I'm doing this, and you don't really need to do a super wide one, right? But just like a little bit. You can't really tell if what I'm doing is because I'm just bad at spacing or something, right? Or bad at clicking, for example, or if it's because I intentionally want to move more forward, right? And combining these two techniques kind of can give you an even harder to read, let's say, movement pattern, right? And what we're really trying to do with spacing is to make our movement pattern as hard to read as possible. Because making the movement pattern hard to read, on top of being able to read the enemy movement pattern, is going to allow us to get free auto attacks, right? So then the alternative would be, if we're actually going to like purely wiggle, right? Then what is the actual advantage of us wiggling rather than standing still and just facing the enemy's direction, right? If I actually start moving like this, the only real advantage that I'm getting by just purely wiggling is a little bit of a distance where I can kind of propel myself forward if I do it like this. So I do a little wiggle and then I propel myself forward like this, right? Like if I do it as I turn, so like this. So as it's like time for me to turn, I can like start moving forward and I can propel myself slightly forward without you actually realizing in most cases, right? If that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the advantage with this second thing is that combining both of the things, right? So then I can do like a little bit of a wiggle and then on top of that do a little bit of moving, right? If we combine these two techniques and use them in their appropriate situations, then we can get an even harder to read movement pattern. And the point of getting harder to read movement patterns is, again, so you can actually play these spacings out. And in general, there's no real advantage for you being further away from the enemy rather than closer, unless you need to be further because of, say, like jungler, support, whatever, right? If you can't actually approach. But in general, if you're just like, say, in a 1v1 between two ranged champions and you're just thinking about auto attacks, right? Then there isn't really much of an advantage to it, right? So in these scenarios, you're going to mostly want to just be as close as you physically can, and then sort of try to figure out what is the enemy's skill level, right? Like if I actually do something, how will they respond? So will he just respond to my wiggling, right? And trying to out-attack? With him just being like non-reactive, right? Like for example, right now, you didn't react and you just like kind of went for the tower, right? But you were just like chilling, like going for the tower, right? But in general, players will react in different ways, and we want to test how they react to different scenarios so that we know what kind of advantage we can accrue and what kind of advantage we cannot accrue. Obviously, if we add into spacing, say, skill shots, if we add into spacing like minions and such, it's going to be very different. So right now, our attacks are going to do the same amount of damage because we should have the same AD. Maybe not if I have absolute. No, I don't have absolute. Okay. So our attacks should do the same amount of damage, right? So in this case, it's going to be advantageous for whoever is able to get the other one into their minions or get a free auto attack. So in that case, if you're standing where you're standing right now, then me actually walking up is not going to really do anything for me. I kind of need to bait you in. So I need to like walk up and then I need to generally do something along these lines where I'm not really giving you an auto, but I'm kind of like baiting you in, right? But obviously like not giving an auto would be ideal.
Yeah, okay.
So then you try to do the same, right? And when you're doing that, right, it's like, oh, well, I want to get an auto, right? And at some point, you might actually get me like far enough for me to take minion aggro. But if neither one really wants to go far enough for minion aggro, it's just going to be a neutral position where both are trying to get a free auto attack off, right? And in general, it's going to be pretty bad for you to trade auto attacks 1-for-1 with someone who is lower skill than you. You're generally going to want to get free auto attacks against someone who's lower skill because there are going to be, say, at least two people usually impacting your lane, whether that be the enemy ADC and support, whether that be the enemy mid lane and jungle, whatever it may be. It's always going to be like an addition of a support or a jungler or something that's going to also impact your lane. And if you have more HP, you have more to work with. In the case that you're the worst player in the lane, you can recognize that and you can actually trade. Because if you trade as the worst player, then generally you're going to be able to have the enemy be more punishable and less able to use their actual skill, right? And as long as you're not actually dying, which would be bad for you, right? Obviously. But in this case, something like this is going to be a pretty safe range to really work with. Though you do have to keep in mind that these indicators are really not accurate. They hate making accurate indicators in this game. It's also because the game is 2D, but also 3D. 3D drawn and 2D actual mechanical, which is funny. Okay, we can leave this game now, though. I think we've demonstrated all I wanted to demonstrate. One sec. Okay, so I think that should demonstrate all that you really need to think about in terms of spacing for now. And I think if there are any questions or things that might need to be added, I'll make a future video that updates on that. But for the really basics of trading and understanding this kind of concept, that should be good enough. So to recap, your champion is going to have variables such as the range, the damage you do, the position of the minions, and such. And on top of that, you will have the range from the enemy champion, which is going to be how long you have to react. You can then use these things to get free auto attacks, to get 1-for-1 trades, to overwhelm the enemy's, let's say, mental calculations of whatever is going on in the lane, whatever, or their ability to figure out what's going on in the map. And you can also try, and the keyword here is try, to get them to do what you want. So pulling back being getting them in, and going forward meaning attacking, right? Generally, if you actually believe something they're doing is incorrect, right? If you believe their spacing is incorrect, then you should go forward and you should actually try to punish them. If you believe their spacing is correct and justified and the space they're taking up is completely okay, then you should go backwards or just match them, right? And that should be all for today. If there are any questions or anything you would like to add or whatever, or an idea for a future video, then you can leave that in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, then like and subscribe, I guess, and we might see more of them in the future. And I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.